What is up, guys, and welcome to another episode of iLOUmination. It's Wednesday, March the 23rd. Today's episode is going to be special because it's going to be the first in a series of revisiting old topics that we're going to be rebooting and making better. As I mentioned in my reboot video, we're going to be revisiting a couple of topics that I felt were done very poorly in my 2013 run with iLOUmination, and this time I'm going to try to make them or do them better. What we're going to be talking about today is photography 101. Now, in the previous run, that was just a single video, but I've decided this time around that we're going to be expanding it into a sort of mini series or maybe an ongoing series that will tackle the basics of photography. So for the next 6 or so weeks, every Tuesday or Wednesday, I'm going to be uploading a video relating or that's going to cover some basics about photography. So without further ado, let's get started on photography 101. Now, I'd like to start off this entire series by saying that the camera is really just a tool, and definitely you need to know your tool to be able to execute whatever vision you might have for your photography or for your photos. But most people end up being obsessed with getting the better camera or getting a better lens or more cameras or more lenses. And I think in this day and age, or we ought to realize that it's not about the quantity, but it's about the quality. So even if you only have one good lens, one good camera, or even just any camera, so long as you can take pictures with it, you'll be able to take amazing photos with it. But you must learn. You have to know the basics of what makes a good photograph, and more importantly, you have to understand how your camera works. Now, there are some people who are just intuitively good at framing and taking photos, but to make it something consistent that you can really bank on it, you have to learn the basics and you have to understand them, and that's what I hope to achieve with these videos. So always remember, it's never about the gear you use. In fact, the word photography comes from the words photos and graphias, Greek words which literally mean light and to capture or to record. So it's always about your vision and not your camera. So with that said, let's get on with the show. So you might have bought yourself a camera. For a while, you've been taking pretty good photos with it. You were able to capture some great memories. And for the most part, you're able to take some amazing photos with it in the past couple of months or years of use. But now the honeymoon phase is over. You're starting to realize that there's more to this camera than just its auto mode. So you start to ask yourself, how can I take better photos? First thing you have to realize, you have to ask yourself, what kind of camera did I even buy? Was it a DSLR? Or a mirrorless camera? Or was it a point and shoot? Or the whole time were you just using your phone's camera? Each of these kinds of cameras, or each of these different camera configurations, have their own inherent strengths and weaknesses. Exceptions to the rules abound, obviously, but for the most part, they have their own strengths and weaknesses. All of that is going to be discussed in a different video. For now, what we want to do is we just want to familiarize ourselves with what makes these cameras what they are. Now, DSLR stands for Digital Single Lens Reflex. In a nutshell, what it means is it's a camera with one lens that's used to both focus images into its viewfinder and also allowing capture of images. Digital in the sense that it doesn't capture images using film. In a DSLR, typically you're bound to see a couple of things in common. All DSLRs have separate bodies and lenses. Now, these typically can be taken apart, removed, and stored separately. Now, the body typically contains a sensor used for capturing the image, a viewfinder which allows you to see what the lens sees and aim through the lens itself, a memory card or a storage device, and then a mirror assembly. Now, this mirror assembly is what makes an SLR kind of unique. The mirror allows the entire camera to use just one lens to aim and to capture the image itself. In the past, there were camera configurations called twin lens reflex cameras. They would have a separate lens for focusing and then a separate lens for capturing the image. Now, obviously, these were very bulky, and as soon as single lens reflex cameras caught up in terms of quality, these sort of got phased out very quickly. What makes a mirrorless camera unique is the fact that it is all of those things that a DSLR is. It has a lens, it has a body, it has typically a viewfinder, it has all the same things a DSLR would have typically, but without the bulky mirror assembly. Now, without the mirror assembly, this allows the engineers at the camera companies to shrink down the body size, effectively making it a very, very compact system. The lenses accordingly also become smaller, and you're left overall with a much more compact system, which can be used and carried with a lot of ease in day-to-day life. Point and shoots are pretty self-explanatory. They've been around for ages. Their quality has been more or less the same since the mid-2000s, and effectively the biggest advantage of having a point and shoot is that it's small, it's compact, fits in the pocket, and more importantly, it can be whipped out at any second and take a picture. Now, considering how dramatically smaller this camera is in comparison to something like a DSLR, sacrifices to quality will always occur. However, if it really depends, is the versatility or the convenience of carrying it around more important to you, or is it the image quality that you're really concerned about? This is not to say that all point and shoot cameras have rather shitty quality. In fact, there are some point and shoot cameras that take great photos and can still fit in the pocket. Now, contesting for the throne of pocketability are your camera phones. The camera in your smartphone is winning that battle. Ever since the iPhone was released back in 2007, camera phones or phone cameras have steadily been increasing in quality, making leaps and bounds in every generation. In this generation, between things like the iPhone 6s, the Samsung Galaxy Note 5, the Samsung S7, the LG G5 or the G4, even the most recent Nexus camera, the Nexus 6P, takes images that are on par with the quality you'd probably see from point and shoots or even SLRs. What that really comes down to is, when you bought the camera, what did you value more? Was it image quality or was it pocketability? I know of a fair few people who've dumped their entire camera arsenal and just ended up buying a smartphone with an exceptional camera. A couple minutes ago, we started mentioning about sensors, and some of you might not entirely be sure what a sensor is or what it does in the camera. Now, suffice it to say, this is the heart and core of your digital camera. A camera sensor effectively is the replacement for what film was during the analog days. It is a little piece or a thin piece of silicone or some other technical wizardry that captures the light and then converts it into data. Not all sensors are made equal. Obviously, smaller gadgets will need to have smaller sensors, and bigger gadgets can allow bigger sensors to be placed. But never be confused about sensor size and the number of megapixels in the sensor itself. Sensor size refers to the actual physical dimensions of the sensor itself, whether it's going to be a thumbnail-sized 1-incher or if it's going to be a huge 2-inch, 2.5-inch deal. Different sensor sizes obviously lend to different picture qualities, but as a general rule, a bigger sensor like those found in SLRs results in better image quality. Now, megapixels are an interesting thing. By definition, megapixels literally refers to how many millions of or light sensitive areas there are on the sensor itself. Now, typically, more is better. More megapixels means more details or finer details captured onto the image itself. But imagine having to cram more people into the same size train car. It's not going to be a comfortable ride. It's not going to be something you're going to enjoy. Typically, more people in a small sized train car is going to result in a lot of heat, a lot of aggravation. It's much the same in camera sensors. A lot of companies in the past have been abusing this as a sort of a marketing gimmick, stating, that this small-ass camera with a tiny-ass sensor can or contains anything upwards of 20 megapixels. And for the most part, that's just marketing. A more dense sensor is not necessarily always good. If it's the right size can help you capture details you would not imagine. But more megapixels in something the size of a sensor of a camera phone or the sensor of a point and shoot is not always going to be a great deal. It's going to have a lot of trade-offs, and for the most part, in those cases, they're just marketing gimmick. So with that general stuff taken care of, right now we're going to move on to camera settings. However, I'm not going to be talking in depth about any of these camera settings in this video. As I said, we're going to be expanding this into a series that you can watch, or that's going to be uploaded over the next couple of weeks. We're just going to be sort of familiarizing ourselves with what each of these camera settings mean, and then how they relate on a general sense to how you take photos. First, we're going to be doing aperture, and then we're going to be doing shutter speed, ISO, and white balance. So why these four settings? Now, these four settings dictate to your camera how the image should be taken. Each one of them has a different effect on how the image is eventually taken, and we'll cover those in the individual videos. These are, I think, the most basic things that you should know to use and understand so that you can utilize it correctly when the time comes. Let's talk about aperture. Aperture is basically a lens thing. Literally, it refers to the size of the opening on the lens through which the lens itself focuses the light that you're trying to capture. Okay? So a bigger opening is pronounced as a smaller number, and a smaller opening is pronounced as a larger number. Typically, it is preceded with an F and then a slash. So usually read as F1.8, F1.4, F3.5, F4, F2.8, up to usually F11 or F22. And what this dictates is, first, the sharpness of your image. Typically, lenses wide open will produce a much more fuzzy image compared to when the opening is reduced somewhat. Secondarily, it also affects something called bokeh. What that is that pleasing background fuzziness that you usually see in SLR photos. It is worth noting that because of certain physical and engineering limitations, cameras with larger sensors typically enjoy better bokeh. So that's why you usually can tell a camera, a shot or an image was taken using a DSLR rather than something like, say, a point and shoot or your camera phone. Not to say this is not the bokeh thing, the fuzzy background thing is not achievable using either a point and shoot or a camera phone. I'm just saying it's usually easier to do on a DSLR. Aperture affects image sharpness and your background blur or bokeh. Second thing we're talking about is shutter speed. Now, shutter speed effectively is just going to be how quickly your sensor is being exposed to the light. Generally expressed as a number 1 over a certain number. Literally, it means that the sensor is open or allowed open for, let's say, the reading is 1 over 30. It literally means that the sensor was exposed to light for 1/30th of a second. If you've ever used a DSLR or any sort of camera that allows you manual control over the settings, you'll note that most cameras go up to 1 over 2000 or 1 over 4000, and that means that the camera sensor is exposed or is allowed to see the light for just 1/2000th of a second. Conversely, you can also open it up for quite a long period of time, going minutes or sometimes hours, keeping the sensor open. So what does shutter speed control? Well, one of the things that it controls is, aside from the brightness of the image, since this is the setting that controls how quickly light is allowed to touch the sensor, it also controls motion blur. So if you've ever seen any sort of sports photos, basketball, tennis, volleyball, definitely you've seen shots where the ball, fast as it may be, is frozen in midair, as if time was stopped. This can be achieved by using a very, very high shutter speed, so something in the range of 1 over 2000 or higher if possible. Do not confuse shutter speed with frames per second if you're shooting video, and that's something we'll tackle in a later video. Third thing is ISO. Now, ISO literally just means how sensitive the sensor is to light exposure. A lower number typically means a darker image, and a larger number typically means a brighter image. Since in this case, literally, it's just telling your sensor how sensitive it has to be to the light. A lower number means it's less sensitive, therefore needing more light. This parameter is typically measured in increments of hundreds. So you usually start off with something like ISO 100 and then moving up double in number every time. So 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, 6400, and in these new amazing cameras, the DSLRs that we have these days, they go as high as 25,000. There are newer cameras even that reach 51,000 ISO. Literally, you can see the dark with these newer cameras. If in the environment you're shooting at, there's very little light, you want to crank up the ISO as much as possible. There are also other things that your ISO affects. One of them, and most apparent to them, is actually what you call your image noise. Now, image noise, just as a sort of a primer here, doesn't mean that the noise is like wavy or vibrating or you can see sounds. No, that's not what noise in this context means. Image noise literally means those little mosquito looking things, those little freckly things that you see in your image, if it's too dark, that's what image noise is. One last thing we're going to tackle on before ending this video is white balance. A lot of people ignore this setting, this parameter, and they just leave it usually in auto mode. Now, your white balance is very important since you don't want the people in the pictures you take to end up looking like aliens. All too often, the camera isn't able to pick up the correct white balance for a scene, and people end up having skin too red, too yellow, too blue, too green, or anything in between. One example would be if you're somewhere with fluorescent lighting or somewhere with tungsten lighting, your camera is going to have a real tough time figuring out what is the correct white balance, and it's better if you know how to manually set the white balance yourself. We're going to cover that, how to cover that. We're going to cover how to change that in the video connected to this topic. I think that's everything for now. I hope you become a little bit more familiar with some of the terms, and definitely don't worry, we'll be going into a little bit more depth going forward. Again, we're going to be uploading each of these over the next couple of weeks. You can click the link on the video here once those are up. We're going to be doing aperture first, again, as I mentioned, in the next week or two. So go ahead and click them now and go to the video that you're most interested about. They're just going to be here. So that's it for today's video. I hope everyone has a safe and sound Holy Week. It's going to be Easter Sunday in a couple of days. Maybe gonna upload a video on Saturday. I'm not certain yet. It really depends on how things go over the next couple of days. But I will try to upload something. I'll probably try to upload a camera shopping video then, so we can go ahead and move on to aperture on next Tuesday. So as always, it means a great deal to me if you go ahead and hit the like and subscribe buttons below. Also leave your comments to let me know what kind of videos you'd like to see me do in the future, what other topics you'd like me to cover in Photography 101 or any kind of other how-tos. Also, tell me what you liked and didn't like in this video. Is it too long? Is it too short? Am I talking too fast? Just let me know how you feel in the comments down below. And again, I hope everyone has a safe Holy Week. And I think that's it. I will see you soon. And always remember, stay illuminated.